Rise of the European Emperor by Taishan Laonyo.
Chapter 211, The Las Vegas Girl Comes Out, Part 1, Julius II was prepared for the retreat of the Spanish army. Before the Spanish army arrived in the Papal States, Julius II ordered that the grain in all villages be counted and put into nearby cities. In this way, the French army would not be able to rob food when they came. Sure enough, when the French army arrived in the Papal States, they were dumbfounded to find that there was no food to rob in the villages. After asking, they learned that the food had been taken into the city. If the French army attacked those small cities, they could take them down in a week or two. But the problem was that the Spanish army was chasing behind, and they had no time to attack the city. In desperation, the Duke of Armagnac could only lead the French army to continue to retreat northward. After enduring several days of hunger, the French army finally withdrew into Florence. It was originally thought that Florence, as an ally of the French, should provide food and fodder. When they first entered Florence, some small towns that had not yet been controlled by Stade's army did provide food and fodder for the French army. However, when they arrived at Florence, the core city in Florence, the French army found that there was no food in the villages around Florence. The Duke of Armagnac immediately realized that there was a problem in Florence. However, even if they realized this, the French army had no way to deal with it. Because the Spanish army was chasing them. So they continued to move north and retreated to the Duchy of Modena, intending to grab a ticket in the Duchy of Modena. After not eating enough for many consecutive days, and the horses of the plate armor knights did not get enough feed. As a result, after many days, many horses of the plate armor knights were also starving. Although eating grass can also make you full. However, in this winter, the grass on the ground has withered and has little nutrition to eat. In addition, the knights' war horses in Western Europe have always been fed with fine feed. Without fine feed for a long time, the horses' steppes have become a little empty. In desperation, many knights had to dismount and lead their horses to walk with their comrades. Otherwise, riding a horse to hurry on the road will sooner or later tire the malnourished war horses. War horses are not draft horses, and the death of one will make people feel very distressed. Especially the knights who lost their war horses will be very sad. Because each war horse is carefully selected by the knights and they have cultivated feelings for many years. The relationship between knights and war horses is more like friends. If a war horse dies of exhaustion, the knight's sadness is no less than the death of a family member. As for the draft horses used by knights to change, it is also uncomfortable because they are responsible for carrying the knight's plate armor and the horse armor of the war horse. Therefore, knights cannot ride on draft horses. Because the draft horses are already very tired carrying such heavy plate armor and horse armor, and if the knights ride on them, the horses will die. So, when they arrived in the northern part of Florence, those French knights basically dismounted and walked, and then led two horses to hurry on their way. Let's switch the camera to the city of Las Vegas south of Dithmarschen. The time is Christmas in 1503. After a month of training, the 100 beautiful and sexy girls selected by Griffin from the port of Emden have completed their initial training. These 100 girls are all beautiful and sexy. However, they don't know German. For this reason, Griffin hired several people who know Russian to train the girls in simple German daily expressions. Generally, they are used to greet guests, and some are used to praise guests in bed, such as, "You are so awesome." Anyway, they are used to flatter guests. In addition, you must learn to pretend to be high. When you meet a quick shooter, you must pretend to be high at the same time so that the guests can get a sense of accomplishment. In Las Vegas, Marin's service principle is, the customer is God, and you must treat the customer as your second uncle to serve. Of course, if you encounter someone who deliberately makes trouble, there are also thugs to solve it. The service industry personnel of this era have not yet realized the importance of customers. They are still at the level of vegetable market vendors, and it is common to shortchange them. The relationship between businessmen and customers is basically an opposition or semi-opposition of fighting wits and courage. Therefore, Marin's service attitude of treating customers as God is definitely hundreds of years ahead of the times. For example, the women in the women's branch of this era are very unprofessional. For example, after the customer is done, the prostitutes will immediately push the customer away, and then, after collecting the money, they will immediately drive the customer away. In short, before getting the money, the prostitutes will smile at you and treat you as a boss. After collecting the money, they will drive you away as soon as the service is completed. The attitude before and after is very different. But in Las Vegas, the great Count Marin, indirectly through Griffin, requires all practitioners to vigorously learn the quality of Don Juan's service staff and to respond to customers, female ticket customers, with a sincere smile. When facing the quick shooter customer, you must also pretend to be orgasmic at the same time. After the service, you must also pretend to be affectionate and reluctant to let the customer go, so that the customer will mistakenly think that you have fallen in love with him. In fact, when Griffin was training the girls, he was always confused. Where is this Don Juan? It sounds like a paradise on earth. In addition, Griffin also discovered some talented people among the girls. The so-called talent means singing and dancing. Griffin stipulated that all those who sing well or dance well can be exempted from the obligation to receive customers. Of course, if there are wealthy customers who like them and spend a lot of money, they can also consider going out. In fact, this model is the star model proposed by Marin. In other words, those who are good at singing and dancing will serve as performers to add an annoying atmosphere and artistic atmosphere to the women's branch and improve the style. In this way, those female ticket customers will feel that the women's branch in Las Vegas is more upscale. And those performers will not go out easily. Because, after all, they are already stars on the stage, so their worth is naturally different. For example, those ordinary girls who receive customers only need 2 or 3 pfennigs at a time, which is a day's salary. But those girls who sing and dance, because they are stars, the performance fee is not just 2 or 3 pfennigs. The famous ones have to be calculated according to gold coins, that is, 60 pfennigs. This is the difference between ordinary women and female stars. In addition, Marin also designed multiple sexy costumes for those girls. The most basic is modern underwear. In fact, the underwear of modern female stars uses very little material, just a few pieces of cloth to cover 3 points. But don't underestimate these pieces of cloth. A few pieces of cloth will create beauty when they cover. After all, distance creates beauty. Those pieces of rags block the cannibalistic eyes of the female ticket customers. Although it only covers a little, it also has the effect of making people have infinite reverie. In fact, if these pieces of rags are removed, the core parts of the female prostitutes will be exposed, which may make people feel boring. Of course, the new girl in Las Vegas is still pink at the 3 points, and she is also very attractive without covering it. It's just that covering it with modern underwear gives people a little room for reverie, which is also very attractive. Chapter 212, The Las Vegas Girl Comes Out, Part 2. In addition, not only modern underwear, Marin, the omnipotent time traveler, also directed the tailors to make a lot of uniforms. For example, princess dresses, female knight's armor. Of course, the female knight's armor is fake. The real plate armor, those women can't wear it. So, Marin asked the tailors to sew the plate armor out of cardboard, and then brushed it with metallic paint. In this way, it looks like real plate armor. This is also the way to shoot costume dramas in later generations. Otherwise, how can those heroines wear armor weighing dozens of kilograms? In addition, there are queen costumes, the kind with crowns. As for nurse uniforms and student uniforms, there are none in this era, and no one feels excited when they are made. However, Marin thought about it and ordered the tailors to make a white ultra-short dress. It's the kind of skirt that reveals most of the thighs. Then, he also found a skillful woman to make a lot of fake flowers with floral cloth and weave them into garlands. Obviously, this is to let the Maumei dress up as Greek goddesses. Wearing a wreath on her head, a white dress, and showing off her long legs. She looked like a goddess. Although preparations were complete on Christmas Day, the women's branch in Las Vegas did not open. Because, on this day, Europeans would stay at home with their families, so how could they go out to have fun? However, on December 26th, the second day of Christmas, the first women's branch in Las Vegas opened grandly. The name of this women's branch is Yahongyuan. On the opening day of Yahongyuan, Griffin had people set off a lot of firecrackers and invited a band to play non-stop. Moreover, the scheduled flights sent to Hamburg and Cuxhaven also had publicity personnel shouting non-stop. In addition, there was also a parade in Hamburg to help with publicity and shouting. It just so happened that during the days of Christmas Island and New Year, Europeans generally had nothing to do and were relatively idle. Therefore, many gamblers and female ticket customers with spare money boarded the scheduled flights and went to Las Vegas. As soon as they arrived at the newly opened Yahongyuan, many female ticket customers found that several beauties in red uniforms bowed to them at the gate and said, "Welcome," with a smile. In addition, a high platform was built at the gate of Yahongyuan. There were about 20 beautiful and sexy Maumei girls, wearing white leg-revealing dresses and fake garlands on their heads, looking like goddesses. They stood on the stage and danced in unison, the leg-shaking dance. This dance was influenced by the Korean girl group Girls' Generation. The biggest feature of this girl group is that they frequently shake their thighs, white thighs. Then, many people were stunned by the row of white thighs and knelt down under their thighs. Although it was winter, these Maomai girls were not afraid of the cold. After drinking some cold-resistant brown sugar ginger water, these Maomai girls went on stage to shake their thighs vigorously. Facing 20 pairs of white long legs, many men who came to watch the fun were stunned. Many people drooled, and some were so useless that they were stunned. No wonder, those were the long legs of girls' generation that could make many, watched countless movies. Otakus bow their heads in the 21st century, not to mention the German perverts in the early 16th century who had never seen the world. So, when the girls were tired of dancing and left, a large group of German men with excessive testosterone rushed into a home courtyard. Hey, give me a Greek goddess. The leg-swinging dance just now was called Greek Goddess Dance by the announcer. So, the German perverts who rushed into a home courtyard clamored for Greek goddesses. Fortunately, there were enough Greek goddess costumes in the home courtyard, and each room had a kong with oriental characteristics, which was very warm. The German perverts got their dream Greek goddess as they wished. However, the starting cost was 3 pfennigs. However, for these female ticket customers, it is understandable that it is a little more expensive in the case of excessive testosterone secretion. These beautiful girls in the home courtyard not only wore sexy clothes, but also used rose-scented perfumes prepared by perfume blenders that Marin dug from Rome. They were clean and fragrant. This is very different from the female prostitutes that these German perverts usually meet. You know, the clothes that ordinary German women wear are not very good, they are more rustic. At most, they are a little more colorful than the clothes of rural women. Moreover, those ordinary German women who charge low fees are also average in appearance. Especially those with lower prices, their appearance is naturally ordinary. Moreover, due to religious reasons, those German women don't take a bath very often, resulting in a smell on their bodies, which is not much different from men. As for high-end things like perfume, only the senior women in some large women's branches have the financial resources to buy it. Ordinary women don't have the financial resources to buy it. Therefore, although the cost is high, the service enjoyed by the female ticket customers is also extraordinary. The beautiful Maomai, the fragrant body, and the gentle attitude, much better than those tigresses in the female ticket customers' homes. In Yeongyuan, the German perverts felt the treatment of God. Even those quick shooters were praised by those pretty girls. You are really good, you are almost tormenting me to death. Then, they even matched their expressions with a climax, acting like it was real. Then, the confidence of those quick shooters returned. In fact, because of their confidence, many quick shooters extended their time. Even when they left, those girls looked at the female customers who were tying their belts with affection, as if they were reluctant to leave. When the female customers were about to leave, those girls would say in a coquettish voice in German, "Uncle, will you come again tomorrow?" The female customers were shocked, their souls were hooked, and then they couldn't help but agree. In fact, those girls only knew a few words of German, and they didn't understand the responses of those female customers. After the customers left, those girls would quickly run to the greenhouse, find hot water, and wash their bodies, especially their lower bodies. Then, she put on the goddess's skirt again, put on the garland, and continued to stand there beautifully, seducing the next German pervert. Every time she saw a German pervert looking over, these Maomai standing at the door of their respective rooms would respond with the goddess smile, and excitedly waved to the German perverts, as if they had seen their relatives. If they didn't understand German, they would probably have directly solicited customers. These girls have been trained by Griffin and many brothels. At the beginning, some Maomai refused to accept customers. However, they were beaten directly, and they were not given food. After all, they were all weak women, how could their arms twist their thighs? So, in the end they all gave in and learned to please the customers. Although they were still a little unfamiliar, the general process was not wrong. Moreover, these Maomai did not have a strong sense of shame like the ancient Chinese women because of the influence of feudal ethics, and they would not have any death. After the discomfort of the first few days, those Maomai who were originally passionate and unrestrained did not care. Chapter 213 It is indeed a huge profit. Because of the size of the building space, Yeongyuan only has 50 rooms. So, although there are 100 beauties, only 50 of them actually come out. On the first day of opening, the reputation was probably not loud enough. Although there were many people coming, they were not too many. At the end of the day, the Maomai only received an average of 10 guests each. However, because the price is high, the starting price per person is 3 pfennigs. As a result, the revenue in this area on the first day was as high as 1,500 pfennigs, equivalent to 25 gold coins. In addition, Yeongyuan also sells alcohol and food, and the price is a little more expensive than other places. At the end of the day, the turnover in this area was as high as 5 gold coins. In other words, on the first day, the total turnover of Yuan was as high as 30 gold coins. And the operating cost invested on the first day was only about 8 gold coins. In other words, the profit on the first day was as high as 22 gold coins. If there is such income every day, then the annual profit will be as high as 8,030 gold coins. 8,000 gold coins, what kind of concept is that? Marin remembered that the annual income, excluding costs, of the 100 ugrams of farmland led by Knight Hoffman was only about 50,000 pfennigs, equivalent to 833 gold coins. In other words, the annual income of Yuan is basically equivalent to the income of Knight Hoffman for 10 years. Even some baronies cannot match such income. The next day, Griffin found that the flow of customers was even greater. It turned out that the guests on the first day went back and boasted that they had spent the night with the goddess in Las Vegas. Then, many new guests, led by old guests, took the scheduled flight again and came to Las Vegas. As a result, the turnover on the second day reached 46 gold coins, half more than the first day. Moreover, the next few days maintained a high level of 40 to 50 gold coins per day. Moreover, because of the booming business of Yuan, it also boosted the business of the casino. After all, those wealthy guests can't just look for girls when they come. Even if they find a Maomei to spend the night with, ordinary people will only spend more than 10 minutes, and those who persist for a long time will only spend dozens of minutes. After the work is done, do you still want to stay there? They still have to receive the next guest. Therefore, those guests who came out of Yuan simply went to the casino to play. Of course, some went to the pub to drink and brag. Some people played too late, and they just had enough money in their pockets and were too lazy to go back, so they stayed in the hotel directly. Then, the hotel's business prospered. In this way, just because of a group of beautiful Maomei, the entire Las Vegas business was revitalized. When the report was sent to Marin could not help but sigh, sure enough, beauty is the economy. No wonder the entertainment industry in later generations is so popular. As long as there are beautiful women or handsome men, there will always be people willing to spend money to support them, and they are willing to spend money. Some pretty boys who only have faces and no acting skills can make hundreds of millions of appearance fees for acting in a TV series, which is better than some real powerful superstars. Women are crazy and willing to spend more money than men. Of course, in this era, women still have no social status. Any woman who dares to spend a fortune on a handsome man must be beaten to death by her husband. Moreover, male favorites are not popular in this era. Therefore, in this era, the only thing that can stimulate the economy is beautiful women. In addition, Las Vegas has not yet been built and only has partial functions. In fact, after Las Vegas is built, Marin will move the homes of the nobles who have lost power in the Duchy of Schleswig and Oldenburg to stimulate the commercial development of Las Vegas. After all, Marin did not deprive the nobles of their property. Their territories are only entrusted. Before, how much food they could harvest in their territories, Marin would give them in full, enough for them to squander in Las Vegas. At that time, Marin will build another more upscale place to only receive nobles and improve the style. Of course, the charges will also be increased. For example, the ex-service that only costs 3 pfennigs in Yuan may be increased to 1 gold coin in that place dedicated to nobles. The price has increased by 20 times. Although it is a rip-off, the nobles will eat it. If you charge him 3 pfennigs, which is about the same as those peasants, they probably won't be happy. Of course, the enjoyment standards of the nobles are also different. For example, not only beautiful women, but also talented beauties are needed. It's not enough to just do that, they also have to be able to sing and dance. It's not the kind of singing and dancing for all guests like Yuan, but singing and dancing for the nobles alone. Otherwise, how can it be called VIP service? Of course, the charging standard for VIP services is also incomparable to that of Yuan, which is for civilians. It must be several times higher, and the profit is naturally greater. In addition, Marin plans to build a large theater in Las Vegas. After it is built, dramas will be performed all day long. For example, Marin can take out several famous works of Shakespeare, find a group of actors, and perform them every day. Those famous works alone can be performed for a long time. In addition, Marin can also select some from many film and television dramas watched in later generations, make changes, and perform them as well. You know, in this era, the spiritual life of Europeans was extremely scarce, and there were no formal theaters. There were dramas in this era, but the level was too low. Moreover, because of the ideological suppression of the church, people were prohibited from pursuing pleasure. Therefore, there were too few dramas that could be produced. After the Renaissance began, only Italy had some drama projects. For example, masked ballets and pastoral dramas. Masked ballets are generally created by court poets and changed from court poems. The costumes are extremely luxurious and the scenes are grand, but the plots are very simple. Because they are changed from verses. How long can a poem be changed again? It is about the length of a comedy in Happy Comedians, which ends quickly. Similarly, pastoral dramas changed from pastoral poems are also short in length and not satisfying to watch. However, these are new things that emerged from the ideological suppression of the Church in the Middle Ages. Therefore, it is inevitable that they are not mature enough. It was not until the defeat of Catholicism in the 16th century and the rise of Protestantism that European drama began to flourish without religious oppression. The representative of them is Britain, which converted to religion and produced a drama god like Shakespeare, who created several world classics. However, at present, Shakespeare will not be born until 60 years later. But it doesn't matter, Marin remembers several of Shakespeare's classics. Because, when he was in college, he often played roles in the dramas rehearsed by his classmates. For this reason, he has memorized the lines of Shakespeare's classic dramas many times. Although he didn't remember them all, he could remember the general idea, which was enough to fool people of this era. By then, once the classics are out, with the help of beautiful women and a large group of rich nobles, Las Vegas will be popular. However, it takes time to build a large theater. Moreover, Marin has no time to write scripts recently, so he is naturally delayed. However, for now, before the nobles move in, Ihome Courtyard can be regarded as making a fortune every day. The income of dozens of gold coins every day is absolutely a huge profit. No wonder Guangzhou wanted to set up an official female branch to prepare military expenses for the hegemony of Duke Huan of Qi. Similarly, Dongwon is also vigorously developing this for GDP. It can be seen that although this way is not right, it makes money quickly and is indeed very profitable. Chapter 214, The Cattle and Horses of Crimea. Previously, in order to promote the Crimean Khanate to send troops to attack Ryazan, Marin promised to buy 10,000 cattle and 1,000 Eastern European Mongolian horses from the Crimean Khanate every year. The Crimeans attacked Ryazan as agreed, and scared the Grand Duchy of Moscow's troops in Finland back, which was considered to have fulfilled the agreement. And Marin did not intend to break the contract. Moreover, it was indeed in its own interests to introduce cheap cattle and horses from the Crimean Khanate. By the autumn, the Crimean Khanate had indeed prepared 10,000 cattle and 1,000 war horses, with a total price of only 90,000 gold coins, 7.5 gold coins per cattle and 15 gold coins for horses. Marin was also ready to receive them, and sent a team of cavalry and some herdsmen to drive this huge team of livestock along the way. So many livestock can obviously only go by land, and there are not so many ships to load them. However, there was a problem on the land route. In order to gain the friendship of the powerful Crimean Khanate, Poland and Lithuania naturally would not object to Marin buying cattle and horses from Crimea, nor would they object to the crossing of those cattle and horses. However, it is hard to say about other countries. Originally, the best route to bring 10,000 cattle and 1,000 horses back to East Frisia by land was to pass through Lithuania and Poland first, then enter the territory of the Electorate of Brandenburg or the Electorate of Saxony, and then pass through the Duchy of Lüneburg to reach the Earldom of Oldenburg. However, the Electorate of Brandenburg and the Electorate of Saxony are both in-laws of Denmark. Marin beat Denmark so badly and cut off so much land. How could the two countries let Marin get his wish? Therefore, the cattle and sheep bought by Marin were directly rejected through the requests of the two countries, and there was no room for negotiation. In desperation, Marin could only choose to go through the Duchy of Pomerania and the Duchy of Mecklenburg from the north of the Electorate of Brandenburg, then through the Duchy of Holstein controlled by Lübeck and Hamburg, and then through the Archbishopric of Bremen, and finally arrived at the County of Oldenburg. However, this matter is also difficult to handle. Lübeck and Hamburg will naturally not cause trouble to Marin, their ally, and the Archbishopric of Bremen is also very respectful. But the Duchy of Mecklenburg and the Duchy of Pomerania are very disrespectful. It turns out that as neighbors of the Electorate of Brandenburg, the Duchy of Mecklenburg and the Duchy of Pomerania are greatly influenced by the Electorate of Brandenburg. Elector Joachim I of Brandenburg not only refused the passage of cattle and horses purchased by Marin, but also asked the Duchy of Mecklenburg and the Duchy of Pomerania to prohibit the passage of cattle and horses purchased by Marin. These two duchies don't have to offend the powerful neighbor Brandenburg for Marin. So, they all rejected Marin's request for cattle and horses to pass through. In desperation, Marin had to ask Lübeck, the leader of the Hanseatic League, to come forward and ask them to help put pressure on the two countries. Lübeck did come forward to help put pressure, and the Duchy of Mecklenburg surrendered because it was more dependent on the Hanseatic League. But Pomerania is simply a wild rural country on the Baltic Sea, and it doesn't care about Lübeck's threats. So things came to a standstill. The people of Lübeck proposed that their cargo ships could load cattle and horses at the coastal ports in northern Poland, and then unload them in the Duchy of Mecklenburg or the Duchy of Schleswig further west, and continue to drive them. But Marin was unwilling to do this, because loading and unloading 10,000 cattle and 1,000 horses would consume huge manpower and material resources. Moreover, the freight was not cheap. The best choice is to drive them on land. Because these cattle and horses can survive as long as they eat some wild grass anywhere. In desperation, Marin had to send someone to bribe the Duke of Pomerania. The Duke of Pomerania finally told Marin's men that this was pressure from the electorate of Brandenburg, not a matter of money. So, in the end, Marin came up with a solution, which was to send someone to register a Chamber of Commerce in Lübeck. Then, in the name of the Chamber of Commerce of Lübeck, it was requested to bring tens of thousands of cattle and thousands of horses through. In this way, the cattle and horses passing through the Duchy of Pomerania no longer belonged to Marin. Then after arriving in Lübeck, this Chamber of Commerce, which originally belonged to Marin, resold the cattle and sheep to Marin. In this way, when these cattle and horses passed, they were no longer Marin's things. The requirement of the electorate of Brandenburg was not to let the cattle and horses under Marin pass, but it did not say that the cattle and horses of Lübeck were not allowed to pass. In this way, although they knew there was a problem, Marin and the Duchy of Pomerania perfectly avoided the difficulties of the electorate of Brandenburg, allowing the cattle and horses of Crimea to get the opportunity to pass by land. But because of this, the 10,000 cattle and 1,000 war horses that were originally planned to be introduced from Crimea in the fall were not introduced until winter. Tens of thousands of cattle and thousands of horses made a lot of noise when they passed by. Fortunately, these cattle and horses are livestock that can solve the problem by eating grass. In particular, the 1,000 Eastern European Mongolian war horses produced in Crimea can also eat grass along the way. If they were replaced with European horses, 1,000 war horses would require a large amount of oats every day, and the cost of raising them would be extremely high. Driven by a group of herdsmen, these tens of thousands of cattle and thousands of horses passed through Lithuania and Poland, entered the Duchy of Pomerania, and then passed through the Duchy of Mecklenburg and entered the Duchy of Holstein. Then, continue westward until the native area of East Frisia. Around the new year of 1504, these tens of thousands of cattle and thousands of horses finally arrived outside the city of Aurich. As soon as they arrived in Aurich, the treatment of these cattle and horses immediately changed greatly. Those Eastern European Mongolian war horses were immediately arranged to the official horse farm, raised as treasures, and fed with a lot of oats and some soybeans shipped from America. As for the cattle, since there was no shortage of cattle in the country, Marin picked out 2,000 of them and killed them for meat. After a long journey, these 10,000 Crimean cattle lost a lot of weight, but because of long-term running, their muscles did not decrease, but became very strong and chewy. These 2,000 cattle had just completed the long march and had not yet taken a breath, but they were unfortunately sent back to the slaughterhouse and turned into beef. It happened that the weather in January was still very cold, and the thinly sliced beef was used by Marin to eat beef hot pot. However, the only drawback was that there was no pepper in the hot pot soup, and it was not tasty enough. Therefore, Marin could only use beef bone soup as the base soup, and add some other sauces to make a non-spicy beef hot pot. Marin's way of eating suddenly became popular among the East Frisian nobles. Because of the high grain yield, the nobles of East Frisia are now rich and pay more attention to food and drink. In the past, everyone was used to eating black bread and rarely ate white bread. However, since they became rich with Marin, the nobles of East Frisia have been eating white bread every day, which was very expensive in the early Middle Ages and not often eaten by the king. After hearing that the great god of food Marin invented a delicacy called fat beef hot pot, they immediately followed suit. It happened that Marin sent people to kill 2,000 cows, and the beef was large, which made everyone very happy. Moreover, the Crimean cow was only 7.5 gold coins per head. Counting the tariffs paid by the countries along the way, the average cost of each cow was no more than 10 gold coins. In the German region, the price of each cow was about 20 gold coins. In other words, the cost of buying cattle from Crimea is half cheaper than buying them locally, which is very cost-effective. Chapter 2:15, Cheap Paper from Cape Breton Island. For many days in a row, Marin ate beef hot pot every day. As a result, he got a sore throat and blisters formed at the corners of his mouth. Then, Marin stopped eating hot pot. However, since so much beef was not consumed, Marin did not stop eating beef. Then, Marin changed to frying steak. First, pour oil on the pan, then take out the best steak, add black pepper, and make black pepper steak. Of course, it is not the kind of medium rare steak, but ate well, which is tender and will not cause stomach upset due to undercooking. The introduction of black pepper fried steak is also very popular. In this era, cattle are an important livestock, and beef is relatively rare. Ordinary people generally eat pork or lamb. Beef is often eaten by nobles and wealthy people. However, French cuisine has not yet appeared in this era. Moreover, Europeans are also short of cooking oil at this time. Therefore, it is still very rare to fry food with oil. More cooking methods are roasting and boiling. The black pepper fried steak that Marin made perfectly combines the beef eaten by the upper class and the pepper eaten by the upper class. Moreover, the taste is quite good. Therefore, this simple and aristocratic way of eating, which uses beef, black pepper, butter or olive oil, and onions as auxiliary ingredients, quickly became popular in the East Frisian country and spread to all of Europe. Years later, a shipload of paper was suddenly shipped back from Cape Breton Island in North America. Marin attached great importance to it and rushed to the port of Emden to personally inspect the quality of these papers. After inspection, Marin found that these papers seemed to be of very good quality. Moreover, it seemed to cater to Marin's needs. There were a lot of oil paper in this shipload of paper. Marin once told the craftsman who went to the north of Cape Breton Island to build a paper mill that he hoped to make very cheap paper, and then make thick oil paper, and use oil paper bags to replace animal skins, becoming a very important moisture-proof packaging bag. Then, the paper-making craftsman sent to Cape Breton Island used whale oil to soak thick paper and then heated it to make whale oil paper. However, Marin knew that the real high-quality oil paper was actually made by applying drying oil on the surface of the paper. Drying oils are mainly tung oil, linseed oil, etc. This oil dries quickly and easily forms an oxide layer on the surface of the paper, which has a good waterproof effect. On the contrary, there is non-drying oil. This oil is difficult to oxidize and dry, and exists in a relatively stable oil state for a long time. This oil is very suitable as a lubricant because it is not easy to oxidize. Anyway, Marin remembered that his chemistry teacher in his previous life said that non-drying oil is not suitable for making oil paper. Whale oil is strange. Although it is animal fat, it has a high iodine value of 110 to 135, which is a semi-drying oil. The iodine value of butter and sheep oil is only 30 or 40 points, which is an obvious non-drying oil. Therefore, in order to enhance the performance of the butter paper commonly used in later generations, the paper must be soaked in sulfuric acid before applying butter. Otherwise, butter is not easy to oxidize, and it is difficult to form a dry protective oil film on the surface of the paper. Because whale oil is a semi-drying oil, it is not as difficult to oxidize as butter. Therefore, although the quality of whale oil paper is not as good as that of tung oil paper, it is barely enough. After touching the whale oil paper, Marin did not find that his hands became greasy. Therefore, these whale oil papers can still form an oxidized oil film after a long time or after high-temperature drying. With this batch of whale oil paper, Marin decided to find someone to make these whale oil papers into oil paper bags. In the future, goods that are easy to get wet, such as sugar and salt, will be sealed and packaged in oil paper bags to prevent them from getting wet and deteriorating. You know, these days, sugar and salt are very expensive commodities. If they get wet and deteriorate, the loss will be huge. However, before, the cost of oil paper was too high. Moreover, it is difficult to make qualified oil paper with animal oil. Therefore, in order to protect precious commodities such as sugar and salt, many people use animal skin bags to pack these things. Marin's paper mill on Cape Breton Island used later papermaking technology, resulting in very low papermaking costs. According to the report sent by Garland, the cost of papermaking at the Cape Breton Island paper mill is quite low. Because, among the raw materials for papermaking, except for sodium sulfate, which needs to be purchased from Egypt, it is considered a bit of cost. The rest, such as wood, is simply cut down anywhere. This stuff is everywhere in North America. The same is true for coal used as fuel. There happens to be a large coal mine on Cape Breton Island, North Sydney Coal Mine. In general, the cost of making paper on Cape Breton Island is just the sodium sulfate imported from Egypt, as well as the labor costs of logging, coal mining and coal transportation, plus some salaries of papermakers. This cost is nothing in the face of efficient chemical pulping technology of modern technology. According to Terra's assistants, the cost of making paper on Cape Breton Island is about 1 penny per 100 sheets of paper, which is several times lower than the cost of papermaking in the Ming Dynasty. There is nothing you can do about it. Who told the Ming Dynasty to have a papermaking cycle of more than 100 days? On Cape Breton Island, it only takes 1 day to turn wood into pulp. Therefore, although the salary of Marin's papermaking craftsmen is higher than that of the craftsmen in daiming, and the labor costs such as logging are also higher than those of daiming's papermaking workshops. However, in the face of efficient modern technology, this gap has long been offset. Moreover, it is much higher. Hearing that the cost of 100 sheets of paper is only 1 penny, Geoffrey, who came to join in the fun, can fit a big goose egg in his mouth. He is an old official for many years and has dealt with paper a lot. Geoffrey knows very well that the current price of paper in Europe is 1 penny. Its cost is about less than 1 penny, but it is enough to reach dozens of times the cost of papermaking in Marin's paper mill on Cape Breton Island. In other words, Marin has reduced the cost of papermaking by dozens of times. This is absolutely of great significance for the spread of culture. In the past, ordinary people's daily wages were only 2 pennies. And the price of a piece of paper is 1 penny. That is to say, ordinary people can only afford to buy 2 sheets of paper after working for a day. In this case, can ordinary people's children afford to go to school? Obviously not. You know, a book has dozens of sheets of paper, large paper. This is just the cost of paper. In addition, knowledge itself has a cost. Add the cost of printing and other costs, and ordinary people may not be able to afford a book after working for a month. Therefore, before the mid-19th century, ordinary people could not afford to go to school. It was not until the mid-19th century that the cost of papermaking was greatly reduced after the emergence of mechanical pulping and chemical pulping. Then, European culture quickly became popular, and science really took off in the second half of the 19th century. Therefore, the decline in paper costs has a huge impact on society. When Marin saw the cheap paper produced in Cape Breton Island, he seemed to see the great development of science and technology. Of course, there is also the promotion of cheap oil paper bags. In the future, the storage and transportation of goods that are susceptible to moisture will no longer be a big problem with a large number of cheap oil paper bags. Chapter 2:16, Relocation of the Shipyard. In fact, the good news from Cape Breton Island is not only about the paper mill producing paper. Another good news from Cape Breton Island is that the salt boiling base there has also started operating. According to Garland's report, Garland built a coastal salt boiling base just north of Sydney Bay. The salt boiling base is very close to the North Sydney coal mine, and fuel transportation is also very convenient. The salt boiling base there has been built, and now it's just waiting for Marin to move all the salt boiling craftsmen and cauldrons in the salt city on Texel Island to Cape Breton Island. The coal miners and coal brick workers of the former Hoffman estate led by Schwartz have already started to steadily mass-produce coal blocks and coal briquettes at the North Sydney coal mine on Cape Breton Island. The paper mill in the north of Cape Breton Island has already obtained a stable supply of coal. Now, the new salt boiling base can also obtain a stable supply of coal, just waiting for the collective relocation of the old salt city. After learning that Cape Breton Island was ready, Marin immediately signed an order to order the collective relocation of the old salt city. During the period of relocation of the old salt city, the new salt city on Baltrum Island will expand production to fill the production gap during the relocation of the old salt city. Shortly after the paper transport ship sent by Garland arrived at Emden Port, Terra also sent a ship full of whale oil and whale meat from the North American Twin Islands. At the same time, Terra also brought Marin good news on Amerigo Island. Terra has prepared thousands of old oak logs, each log is more than 30 meters long, and can be used as the keel of a 500-ton or even larger ship. Moreover, these logs have been air-dried on Amerigo Island for 2 years and are completely suitable for shipbuilding. However, these logs are too long and too big, and the 200- or 300-ton cog sailing ships are completely unsuitable for transporting them back to Europe. Therefore, it is most appropriate to build a shipyard nearby on Amerigo Island. Marin obviously agreed with this opinion and had already planned to do so. So, after thinking it over again and again, Marin planned to allocate half of the craftsmen in the Emden shipyard and send them to America to manufacture 500-ton warships and 500-ton armed merchant ships. Needless to say, the 500-ton warships can be directly copied according to the drawings of the Hoffman-class warships. As for the 500-ton armed merchant ships, it is also simple. You only need to reduce the number of logarithms of the ribs of the Hoffman-class warships accordingly. At the same time, the thickness of the side is also reduced. Oak logs with a length of 30 meters are very rare, so Marin decided to use all the thousands of oak logs on Amerigo Island as keel materials. As for the ship ribs, it is entirely possible to purchase suitable materials from Europe first, and then use the stone trough fixation method in the branch factory responsible for manufacturing ship ribs at the Emden shipyard to bend them into the required shape. Then, after drying, they will be transported to the new shipyard on Amerigo Island by ship for assembly of new ships. The new shipyard is obviously of great importance to Marin. You know, if you want to strengthen control over the colonies and open up the eastern trade route, a certain number of large ships is necessary. So, for this matter, Marin personally went to the Emden shipyard and selected more than 300 shipbuilding craftsmen from it. Then, thousands of serfs with a carpentry foundation were selected from the serfs, and together with their families, they were shipped to Amerigo Island, the twin islands of North America, to form a new shipyard. The group of people left behind in the original Emden shipyard also continued to build ships. For example, there are now 4 Hoffman-class battleships under construction in the shipyard. Therefore, Marin only transferred 300 craftsmen, and did not withdraw half of them as originally planned. Otherwise, these 4 battleships would be shut down. However, Marin knew very well that North America would be the main base for building large ships in the future. After all, there is an inexhaustible supply of wood there. Therefore, while withdrawing more than 300 shipbuilding craftsmen, Marin also selected thousands of serfs who knew carpentry skills for these 300 craftsmen and gave them training, so that these thousands of serfs who knew carpentry could also become qualified shipbuilding craftsmen. At that time, with a large number of shipbuilding craftsmen and inexhaustible wood in North America, it would be possible to build a large number of ships in North America. In order to train the thousands of serfs who knew carpentry, Marin planned to let those serf carpenters help the more than 300 shipbuilding craftsmen after arriving at Amerigo Island. The task of the more than 300 old shipbuilding craftsmen was to build a new 500-ton Hoffman-class battleship. And the thousands of serf carpenters first helped on the side and watched and learned. Then, used the rich wood resources on Amerigo Island to cut down some wood at random. It is not necessary to use wood that has been air-dried for 2 years, but to use ordinary wood directly. Obviously, those serf carpenters practiced first and built a few small fishing boats. After building a few small fishing boats, the serf carpenters were almost familiar with the shipbuilding process. By then, they could really help the veteran shipbuilders and participate in the manufacture of 500-ton warships and armed merchant ships. By then, more than 1,300 craftsmen could start building 3 or 4 500-ton warships at the same time. In addition, Terra also submitted an application to officially start the development of Columbus Island, Martha's Vineyard, next to Amerigo Island, Nantucket Island. The main reason is that there are also large tracts of forest on Columbus Island. Even if you don't reclaim farmland on Columbus Island for the time being, it's good to cut down oak suitable for shipbuilding on Columbus Island first, cut down oak suitable for shipbuilding, and preserve it for air drying. Not only that, the climate on Columbus Island is similar to that on Amerigo Island, which is very suitable for growing soybeans. Terra even has another plan, to try to grow wheat on Columbus Island. As a newly promoted noble, Terra's family also has a fief in the East Frisian country, and the output is not small. The annual income is also tens of thousands of gold coins. Therefore, Terra's requirements for life have also become higher. For example, Terra began to dislike black bread and began to like white bread made of wheat flour. However, Terra also understood that the northern part of Germany is not very suitable for growing wheat because of the cold climate, but is most suitable for growing rye. Therefore, if you want to eat white bread, you actually need to import wheat from other countries. Before, when Terra was with Marin, he listened to Marin explain some agricultural knowledge, such as the concept of accumulated temperature. Although he didn't understand, Terra understood one thing, that is, the accumulated temperature of the North American Twin Islands is higher than that of the East Frisian country. Apart from anything else, the North American Twin Islands are hotter than the East Frisian country in summer alone. And Marin said that the hot summer is very necessary for the growth of crops. According to Marin, the North American Twin Islands are more suitable for growing soybeans than Northern Europe because of the summer temperature. Then, Terra inferred that the Twin Islands of North America were more suitable for growing wheat than East Frisia. He submitted this idea to Marin. Marin immediately gave a positive response. In his reply to Terra, Marin affirmed Terra's idea of developing Columbus Island. Moreover, he sent Terra several sacks of wheat and asked Terra to try to grow spring wheat on Columbus Island during spring plowing. However, Marin repeatedly emphasized that shipbuilding and logging are what Terra needs to pay more attention to. As for wheat planting, success is the best, and failure is nothing. The current European wheat varieties are really too poor. Generally, wheat is planted in November of the first year and is not harvested until October of the second year. Such a long growth cycle is absolutely scum in Marin's eyes. However, China's wheat can already be rotated with rice, and its growth cycle is much shorter than that of wheat in Europe at this time. Therefore, after opening up the route to Daming, Marin plans to go to China to introduce Chinese wheat with a much shorter growth cycle to replace the inferior wheat varieties in Europe at this time. Therefore, Marlin didn't care at all whether Terra was successful in growing wheat on Columbus Island. In fact, in Marin's eyes, the two islands in North America were just a springboard for Marin to colonize North America. Moreover, there were not many oak trees on the two islands. The only place with the most oak trees was on the mainland. Only by occupying the mainland, the area of Pennsylvania in the future, and obtaining countless Pennsylvania red oaks suitable for shipbuilding, would it be a real fortune. Marin was now thinking, should he send troops to conquer the North American continent? Chapter 217 The Terrified Spaniards. After several months of sailing in the Atlantic Ocean, Aben and the ship he commanded passed through the Canary Islands, went to Granada, and then returned. Of course, they did not follow the old route to the east coast of North America, but followed the Spanish route and went directly to Spain to implement the plan to scare the Spaniards. The ship docked at the port of Cadiz in southern Spain. Because America had not been greatly developed, the port of Cadiz at this time had not yet prospered. Of course, because it was used as the home port for trade to India, it began to develop greatly. However, trade to India only happens once every 2 years. Therefore, the prosperity of the port of Cadiz is currently far behind that of Barcelona, a port on the Mediterranean coast. Because Barcelona has frequent exchanges with Sicily, Sardinia and Majorca, it is also an important foreign trade port in Spain. The volume of ships entering and leaving the two ports is still incomparable. But in any case, as an emerging commercial port, the port of Cadiz is the most important port in Spain in the Atlantic Ocean and has begun to prosper gradually. Aben's ship, flying the flag of the Spanish Count of Savagery, is a ship belonging to one of our own people, so it can naturally dock at the port of Cadiz at will. After landing, Aben wore a captain's uniform and went to a crowded tavern with a gloomy face to drink. After Aben left, a sailor who changed his sailor's uniform into ordinary Spanish clothes and also knew Spanish followed Aben's footsteps and entered the tavern as a stug. But he did not sit with Aben. Aben's shiny bald head, aging face, and captain's uniform made him look like a man with a lot of stories. After drinking for a while, someone came up to chat with him. Of course, it was not a man looking for a woman to chat with him, nor was it a gay man's chat, but because of curiosity. You know, in this era, the great navigation business has just emerged, and Spain is one of the leaders of the great navigation, so the people of the country are naturally very interested in the great navigation. The port of Cadiz is a seaside port. A captain who appears in a tavern in a seaside port is obviously likely to be a worldly captain who has traveled overseas. Therefore, many people talk to these captains. In fact, they want to hear the legends outside and want to know what the outside world is like. This is not gossip, but an important source of information. In the port of Cadiz, many brokers like to ask for information from captains and sailors who have been overseas in the tavern. If they can find out valuable information, they can exchange it with people in need for money. And the Spaniard named Torres who is eyeing the bald Aben is a broker who likes to hang out in the tavern to find out information. Hey, brother, aren't you lonely drinking alone? Do you mind if I sit down? After saying that, without waiting for Aben to answer, Torres sat down in a familiar manner. Although Aben was drinking, he was a little excited in his heart. Here it comes, the good show is about to begin. After all, it was his first time acting, and Aben was still a little nervous. However, Torres was a two-faced man, and he didn't care about Aben's face that became a little distorted because of nervousness, but began to introduce himself. After a while, Aben finally calmed down and his face returned to normal. By the way, brother, you look so tired, where did you come from? The savage continent, Granada. Aben answered in a muffled voice. Wow, the savage continent, that's a new world, it must be very interesting, right? Can you tell me about the new things there? Aben thought about it and told Torres the story of the war between the Arawak and the Caribs on the island of Granada, and told Torres about the characteristics of the Caribs who like to eat people. Oh my God, the Caribs eat people? What a terrible and cruel barbarian. Torres was shocked. Although there are many wars and killings on the European continent, cannibalism is still extremely rare. Yes, so our Earl's colonial activities in Granada are very difficult. Then why haven't we heard much about cannibalism in our Spanish colony Hispaniola? Torres is a well-informed broker, and naturally not easy to fool. Hispaniola is Spain's only colony in the Americas, and because it is located in the territory of the relatively friendly Arawak people, there are indeed no incidents of cannibalism. Humph, that's because the territory occupied by Spain happens to be within the territory of the friendly Arawak people. If it comes to the territory of the Caribbean people, it's hard to say. After saying that, bald Aben dipped his finger in the wine and simply drew the situation of the Caribbean Sea on the table. This is the Greater Antilles in the north, where mainly the relatively peaceful Arawak people live. The island of Hispaniola occupied by the royal family is in this area. And Grenada, occupied by our Lord Earl, is in the Lesser Antilles in the south. This is where the territories of the cannibalistic Caribbeans and the peaceful Arawak people intersect. Grenada was originally the territory of the Arawak people, but it was often attacked by the Caribbean people. This year alone, it has been attacked 20 times, Aben deliberately exaggerated. In fact, there was only one time, and it was beaten back. Every time there is an attack, the governor of Grenada, Old George, must sound the alarm. All those working outside the castle must withdraw to the city as soon as possible and rely on the cover of the city walls to resist the attack of the cannibalistic Caribbean people. Fortunately, the Caribbeans are not good at attacking cities. Otherwise, if they had broken through, hundreds of colonists on the island would have been roasted and eaten. So scary. Torres, a man of the world who had seen the world, was also frightened by these exaggerated facts. There are more terrifying things. Aben first looked around, then leaned close to Torres' ear and asked in a mysterious tone, "Brother, have you heard of Amway, syphilis?" "I have heard of it." Torres nodded honestly. This thing, after the papal bull, has become famous throughout Europe. As a well-informed man of the world, Torres naturally heard of it, and knew that it was brought back by Columbus's sailors from the savage continent. "I told you, syphilis, a terrible virus, is a common disease that many people have in the savage continent." "How is it possible? If you have syphilis, don't you have sores and pus all over your body and die of ulceration?" Torres has also heard of the miserable conditions of those syphilis patients. "You're right, but that's what happens when Europeans get syphilis. In fact, the bodies of those wild natives seem to be able to tolerate this disease. If we get a terminal disease, our whole body will fester and we will die, but for them, it's just red spots and pimples, not fatal." This was half true and half false. It's true that Indians are very resistant to syphilis, but it's not just red spots and pimples, they will also get sores and pus, but it's not as terrible and fatal as it is for white people. "Is that so?" Torres was shocked, but as a qualified broker, he immediately wrote down this important information. "So, colonists must not touch wild native women, not even once. Those native women, who look healthy, may have syphilis. As long as you sleep with them, there is a high probability of contracting syphilis." "Grenada. What's wrong with Grenada?" Torres asked curiously. Aben looked around quietly and whispered, "Syphilis broke out among the Grenada colonists, 20 people died. Moreover, the coffins of the 20 dead are on my ship, and they are being transported back to East Frisia." Aben's mouth was full of alcohol, and he seemed drunk. However, what he said in this state was the most believable. "What? You have 20 dead bodies of syphilis on your ship? How dare you put them on the ship?" Torres jumped up in fear. In the eyes of Europeans, syphilis, which causes people to die of ulceration all over their bodies, is a very miserable disease and very scary. "What are you afraid of?" "I filled the coffin with lime," Aben said carelessly. "That's dangerous too." Torres didn't dare to get close to Aben, for fear that Aben himself would also suffer from syphilis. At this time, the extra sailor who had been waiting on the side for half a day finally appeared. He touched Torres with his shoulder and winked at him. Torres understood and immediately followed him to the side. "Brother, what's the matter?" "Brother, look, this is so serious. If the guy's ship continues to stay at the dock, syphilis may be transmitted to people on the shore. Otherwise, we go to the authorities and ask the officials to drive away this ship. In this way, we will be safe." That makes sense, I will go to the authorities now, maybe there will be a reward." After saying that, Torres went to pay the bill directly, and then hurried to the city lord's mansion to report. After hearing about this, Marcus, the lord of Cadiz, was shocked and immediately took action. He mobilized the army and rushed to the tavern to drive Aben to the dock, and dared not approach Aben. Then, Aben had to, helplessly, board the ship and return. Marcus did not dare to hide this matter and immediately reported it to the two kings of Spain. Even the exaggerated news that Aben told Torres that most of the natives of the savage continent have syphilis, but it is not fatal, was also reported. Originally, the two kings of Spain might doubt such news. But coincidentally, not long after Aben's ship left, the ship announcing the death on Hispaniola also arrived. When the two kings of Spain were still skeptical about the news of the outbreak of syphilis in Granada, the bad news of the same syphilis outbreak came from Hispaniola. Moreover, 230 of the 500 colonists in Saint-Domingue died directly, which was much more terrifying than on Grenada. Moreover, the fact that the colonists of Saint-Domingue had sex with prostitutes and still contracted syphilis made the two kings of Spain immediately believe the false news that most people in the savage continent have syphilis. So, the frightened Spaniards determined that the savage continent was a place where syphilis was rampant. I don't know who started it, but the Spaniards began to call the savage continent the syphilis continent. Even Isabella I began to doubt whether colonizing Hispaniola was a correct decision. Chapter 218 Easily acquire Cuba Island. The Spanish were panicked by the news of the outbreak of syphilis in the wild continent, and many ministers even suggested withdrawing the colonists on Hispaniola. Because the benefits of Spain on Hispaniola were too different from expectations. Moreover, since the Indian route was established, the Spanish court could obtain much more benefits through the Indian spice trade than on Hispaniola, and there was no need to care about the American colonies. Some radical ministers even said that they should take advantage of the opportunity of replacing the new pope to revise the Treaty of Tordesillas and exchange the benefits of the Oriental trade with the Portuguese in the wild continent full of syphilis. In this way, the Spanish can also monopolize the benefits of the Indian trade. This idea made the Spanish government and the opposition very excited. However, the two kings of Spain also understood that the Portuguese were not fools, so how could they agree to this? If they forced it to do so, then a war would inevitably break out between the two countries. Therefore, sharing the trade benefits of India with Portugal is the most likely. However, the trade benefits of India were so great that it was hard to share them with the Portuguese. But no matter what, the Spanish court at that time had reached a consensus: the place full of syphilis on the savage continent was really not a good place. Coincidentally, Columbus also came back at this time. After several months of exploration, Columbus went south from the western end of Cuba Island, visited the Yucatan Peninsula, and then went south to Panama. With the map given by Marin, Columbus compared it repeatedly, and was shocked to find that there was no mistake. In other words, Marin's teacher Einstein was a real great sailor. And I was so small in front of him. Following the guidance of Marin's map, Columbus discovered a place called Colón on the Isthmus of Panama. Of course, there is no city here. However, Marin marked it as Colón. Next to this city of Colón is a harbor called Limón Bay. After determining this place, Columbus recorded the longitude and latitude of Colón port to facilitate the captain to find the place later. Because Marin told him that this place must be developed in the future. After all, after crossing the Isthmus of Panama, there is the legendary Pacific Ocean. And once you cross the Pacific Ocean, you can reach the China of Columbus's dream. Under the guidance of Marin, Columbus has snatched the honor of discovering the Indian route from the Gama. This time, he plans to snatch the honor of discovering China again. As for Einstein, Marin's teacher who could draw maps a long time ago, Columbus selectively forgot about it. Columbus believed that although the big man named Einstein discovered those places first. However, since he did not announce the news, he did not get the honor of first discovery. Although it was a bit unkind to use the map drawn by Einstein to discover it. However, Mr. Einstein is said to be an ascetic monk who does not care much about fame and fortune. Since the ascetics are indifferent to fame and fortune, it is better to give the honor of discovering those places to yourself. Moreover, my employer Marin seems to support me in doing so. Marin is the disciple of the great ascetic sage named Einstein and the inheritor of Einstein's knowledge. His descendants all agree that I will get those honors. In comparison, Einstein himself will not trouble me. Einstein certainly will not trouble Columbus, because he is not born yet. Columbus originally wanted to land for inspection, but before departure, Marin repeatedly warned Columbus and prohibited him from landing in Panama. Because Marin remembered that the poisonous insects and mosquitoes in Panama are very powerful. If bitten, it is easy to get fatal yellow fever. Columbus is a great sailor, and Marin certainly doesn't want him to die. Therefore, Marin strictly forbade Columbus to land and inspect in the Panama area to prevent him from being bitten by poisonous mosquitoes by accident. As for Columbus himself, he didn't want to die in vain, and finally gave up the plan to go ashore for inspection. After soaking the hull in the freshwater river to get rid of the shipworms, Columbus led the fleet all the way east to Grenada Island. Because of the sextant, Columbus could easily detect the direction of Grenada, whose longitude and latitude had been recorded. As long as the latitude of the fleet and Grenada Island are consistent, and then sailing straight east, you will definitely reach Grenada Island. However, between Panama and Grenada, it is not all ocean. For example, the Guajira Peninsula in northeastern Colombia blocks the road. Of course, this is not a problem, as long as you can easily bypass it. Of course, when bypassing the Guajira Peninsula, Columbus also recorded the local longitude and latitude. In fact, on the map given to Columbus, Marin specially marked the Guajira Peninsula, including Lake Maracaibo under the Guajira Peninsula. Marin actually attaches great importance to these two places. Because there are coal resources in the Guajira Peninsula, and if a steam engine is developed in the future, it can be used as an important coal supply point. As for Lake Maracaibo, let alone, it is a famous oil-producing area in later generations. Why is Venezuela so awesome? Isn't it because of oil as a support? Of course, Marin will never be able to use the oil in Lake Maracaibo in his life, and internal combustion engines are not so easy to make. Drilling oil wells is a major technical problem. Therefore, the coal in the Guajira Peninsula is much more realistic than the oil in Lake Maracaibo. When Columbus arrived at Grenada Island, Aben's fleet had just left. After a few days of repairs on Grenada Island, Columbus followed Aben's route and planned to go to Spain. Because he was going to ask the Spanish kings for the title of Baron of Cuba and planned to make the island of Cuba his own territory. Then, apply to take out the title of Cuba Island and Baron of Cuba, exchange all of them with Marin for a baron title, and then give it to his youngest son Fernando. In this way, both of his sons will become hereditary barons in the future, and both have fertile farmland and an annual income of tens of thousands of gold coins. Columbus's fleet arrived at the port of Cadiz behind the morning ship of Hispaniola Island. When Columbus arrived in Toledo, the capital of the Kingdom of Castile, the capital of Spain was not Madrid at that time. The panic caused by syphilis had spread throughout the Spanish government and the public. Therefore, no one in the Spanish government and the public objected to Columbus's request to become a baron of Cuba. The Spanish ministers looked at Columbus with contempt, because it was Columbus who brought the terrible disease of syphilis back to Europe from the wild continent. If Columbus had not been so excited as to explore the wild continent and deceived everyone that it was India, Europeans would not have intersected with the natives on the wild continent. At the same time, the terrible disease of syphilis would not have been transmitted back to Europe and caused such a great panic. Therefore, no one objected to Columbus's request for the island of Cuba as a territory. They wished that Columbus would go to Cuba to be the Lord, then get syphilis, fester all over his body and die. When Columbus went to handle the procedures to make Cuba his barony, it went very smoothly. Those officials, like sending the plague god, quickly beat Columbus. It seemed that if they said one more word to Columbus, they would get syphilis. In this way, in the atmosphere of panic because of syphilis in the Spanish government and the public, Columbus did not encounter any twists and turns, and easily obtained the authorization of the two kings of Spain, became the Baron of Cuba, and obtained the ownership of the island of Cuba. Next, all Columbus had to do was to return to East Frisia, take the appointment documents, and exchange with Marin for a local baron title and corresponding fiefdom for his second son. Chapter 219, Two Golden Kingdoms in Africa. After Columbus's fleet returned to East Frisia, Marin quickly signed an exchange agreement, exchanging a fertile baronial fiefdom from Columbus for the island of Cuba. Moreover, the baronial title was directly conferred on Fernando, Columbus's second son. After learning that her own son Fernando had obtained the hereditary baronial title, Columbus's current wife Beatrice was very excited. That night, she gave Columbus a full set of health care, which was very gentle. You know, Columbus's title will definitely be inherited by Diego, the eldest son born by his ex-wife. Therefore, under normal circumstances, the future of Fernando, the youngest son born by Beatrice, is not guaranteed. Now, her husband has got a baronial title and fiefdom for his youngest son, which is no worse than what his eldest son will inherit in the future, which makes Beatrice very excited. You know, Columbus is 16 years older than his second wife Beatrice, and there is a very high possibility that he will die before Beatrice. Moreover, Beatrice and her eldest son Diego had a general relationship. Beatrice was afraid that after Columbus died, Diego would treat her and her son Fernando badly. Therefore, she has been urging Columbus to make more meritorious deeds so that she can get a title for her own son Fernando. Originally, she thought it would be good to get a hereditary knight. Unexpectedly, her husband exceeded the task and directly got a baron back. Now, Beatrice is obedient to Columbus. Even when Columbus wanted to go to Las Vegas to find Maumee for a full set of health care at the instigation of his friends, Beatrice did not object. On Marin's side, after signing the exchange documents, the title and territory of Columbus's second son will be implemented immediately. However, Marin's title of Cuban Baron still needs to be reported to Toledo, the capital of Spain, and obtain the signature of Queen Isabella I before it can take effect. However, Marin is not worried about this. Because now the American continent has been upgraded from the wild continent to the syphilis continent. According to Columbus, the Spanish government and the public are now in a panic. If I ask to be the Baron of Cuba at this time, I guess no one will object. Therefore, there is no hurry to report this matter to Spain. What Marin is worried about now is another thing. This thing is how to make Spain and Portugal completely give up their prying eyes on the Americas and put all their focus on the Eastern Hemisphere. Marin hesitated in front of the world map he drew by himself. An Indian trade certainly attracted both Spain and Portugal. But the problem is that Indian trade alone cannot attract all the attention of the two countries. Although it is said that because of the competition for Indian trade interests, the Portuguese did not send a fleet to occupy Brazil in 1500 because of the butterfly effect. However, that was because Portugal was short of manpower and infiltrated the west coast of Africa on a large scale, which consumed a lot of manpower and material resources. Moreover, they also need to deal with the challenge of the Spanish. But the Spaniards are different. They are currently mainly involved in the Indian spice trade, and the only colony in America is Hispaniola Island. It can be said that the Spaniards can still spare a lot of energy, manpower and material resources to do other things. Seeing that after the new year, Spain and Portugal will definitely ask the new Pope Julius II to revise the Treaty of Tordesillas, Marin must find a way to spend Spain's energy elsewhere in the shortest possible time. In this way, they will have no time to toss in the Americas. Even Marin's plan is to let Spain give up America and lead them to the east when revising the new treaty. At the same time, Portugal will not be put in America. Therefore, Marin needs a point of interest that is enough to attract the attention of the Spaniards and let them invest all their manpower and material resources. In this way, they will not be able to spare their hands to come to America. Initially, Marin planned to throw out the trade of the Ming dynasty to attract Two Teeth. However, after thinking again and again, Marin gave up. Because the trade profit with the Ming dynasty was too large, he was reluctant to give Two Teeth. Similarly, Japan has so many gold and silver mines, and Marin was reluctant to throw them out to attract Two Teeth. So, what else can be used to attract Spain and Portugal? Spice Islands? It seems to be a very good choice. But the problem is that the Spice Islands have crossed the Strait of Malacca. As long as you get here, you have entered the sphere of influence of the Ming Empire. With the nose of the Spanish and Portuguese colonists, they will definitely not miss the opportunity to go north to the Ming Empire for trade. So, after thinking about it, Marin gave up this method. Then, the best choice is to attract Spain and Portugal to the African continent. But what is there in the African continent to attract Spain and Portugal? South Africa's gold. Marin rejected it directly. That's the meat in his own bowl, and he must not give it to others. South Africa's gold reserves are too terrifying. If Marin was not strong enough now and worried about the whole of Europe fighting and robbing, he would have sent people to mine it long ago. So, besides South Africa's gold, where else is there? Marin began to close his eyes and recall the knowledge of world history he had learned in his previous life. A few hours later, Marin finally opened his eyes, took out a quill pen, and drew a circle in West Africa and a place in northern South Africa on the African continent. If you know world history and see these two circles, two names will immediately come to mind: the West African, Mali/Songhai, Empire, and the Great Zimbabwe Empire in South Africa. These two countries are famous for their rich gold. Among them, Mansa Musa, the Sultan of the Mali Empire, brought a large amount of gold when he went to Mecca for pilgrimage from 1324 to 1325, and then squandered it in Cairo and Mecca, which caused the gold price in the Arab region to depreciate sharply, and it took 20 years to recover. This also earned Mansa Musa the title of Golden Sultan. How much gold did Mansa Musa bring at that time? It is said that there were 500 guards holding sticks, ceremonial staffs made of gold, each carrying 6 pounds of gold. These guards carried a total of 3,000 pounds of gold, not counting the golden ceremonial staffs in their hands. In addition, there are 100 camels, each carrying 300 pounds of gold. The total amount of this gold is as high as 30,000 pounds of gold. In other words, the amount of gold that Mansa Musa brought to the Middle East for consumption is as high as 33,000 pounds, equivalent to 15 tons. It is no wonder that the gold price in Cairo has fallen sharply and has not recovered for 20 years. You know, so much gold can be made into 4.276 million ducat gold coins. So, the gold production of the West African Empire is very considerable. Such a golden country is definitely enough to attract Spain and Portugal. Moreover, this is still a big pit. Because the West African Empire is located in the hot inland of West Africa, where it is dry and hot, and the climate is extreme. Whether it is the Spaniards or the Portuguese, if they want to conquer the West African Empire, the biggest enemy is not the Mali Empire or the Songhai Empire, but the extreme climate there. Therefore, if you want to conquer the West African Empire, it will inevitably cost a lot of manpower and material resources. If you fall into such a pit, don't think you will have the energy to do anything else. As for the Great Zimbabwe Empire, although the gold production was not as much as that of the West African Empire, it was also very considerable. The Monomopata dynasty of Zimbabwe was rich in precious materials such as gold, ivory, copper and tin. Arab merchants in West Asia built many fortresses and trading points in the coastal areas of Mozambique in the east to trade with merchants from Zimbabwe. The Arabs used cheap cloth, glass products and other items to extract gold, ivory and other valuable items from the Zimbabweans, and they made a lot of money. In fact, for the sake of trade, the Arabs also established some regimes on the coast of Mozambique and occupied this place for a long time to facilitate gold trade with the Monomopata Kingdom of Zimbabwe. It is also a big pit to want to occupy the ancient Zimbabwe Empire. First of all, you have to capture the cities and regimes established by Arab merchants on the coast of Mozambique and drive away all the Arab merchants before you can monopolize the gold of Zimbabwe. For this alone, both Spain and Portugal have to pay a huge price. Then, from Mozambique, we went deep inland to the Zimbabwe Empire, which was also thousands of miles away. Moreover, the local climate was also hot and unbearable. Therefore, conquering the ancient Zimbabwe Empire was also not an easy task. Although both the ancient West African Empire and ancient Zimbabwe were rich in gold, the cost of controlling these two places was also very high. Of course, if we choose trade instead of conquest, the risk will definitely be much smaller. However, Marin knew that with the nature of the Spaniards and Portuguese, they would definitely choose to conquer these two countries and then monopolize the gold benefits. Therefore, they would inevitably fall into the pit and would not be able to get out for decades. Therefore, after thinking again and again, Marin decided to throw out these two African gold countries as bait, so that Spain and Portugal would focus all their attention on this, deeply trapped in the African continent, and would have no time to care for other things for a long time. Then, he secretly went to conquer the Aztec Empire and the Inca Empire in Mexico to obtain the gold and silver mines there. At the same time, he also went to the east to trade with the Ming dynasty, and took advantage of the chaos of the Warring States period when village chiefs were fighting in Japan to seize Japan's Iwami silver mine and Kagoshima gold mine, secretly making a fortune. By the time Spain and Portugal had settled the West African Empire and the ancient Zimbabwe Empire, he would have firmly controlled the trade interests in the Americas and East Asia. By then, he would have been fully fledged, and he would not have to be afraid even if he faced the alliance of Spain and Portugal. Chapter 220, Promoting Paper Invoices. After Marin sorted out the information about the two golden kingdoms, he sent someone to Rome to give it to his father-in-law, Julius II, and attached a letter, suggesting that his father-in-law should add the two golden kingdoms as negotiation conditions when redetermining the Treaty of Tordesillas, and divide them between Spain and Portugal. This time, Marin planned to ask his father-in-law to favor Spain on the surface, but actually pit Spain. Of course, helping Spain on the surface is to pit Portugal nakedly. But Portugal is not a soft persimmon, and still needs an excuse. Therefore, Marin has already thought of an excuse for Julius II. Find an excuse, that is, Spain's contribution to the Catholic world. For example, in 1492, Spain eliminated the Kingdom of Granada and expelled the Green Church from the Iberian Peninsula. Strictly speaking, this is a very meaningful contribution to Catholicism. Therefore, the Holy See can completely use Spain's contribution to the development of Catholicism as an excuse to favor Spain. As for the Portuguese, although the Great Voyage was lively, it did not contribute much to religious causes. Basically, Portugal is a country that is both a merchant and a pirate. The whole country is engaged in great voyages not to spread Catholicism, but for profit. The Spanish kings are different. The couple is the most devout Catholics. Although it is said that the capture of the Kingdom of Granada is a territorial expansion rather than a purely religious act. However, it is true that the couple are fanatical Catholics. In 1478, Queen Isabella established the notorious Inquisition, persecuted pagans and maintained the orthodoxy of Catholicism. Therefore, from the perspective of the Holy See, Spain's contribution to Catholicism is much greater than that of Portugal, and it is reasonable to favor Spain. Of course, the Portuguese cannot say that they have made no contribution to the spread of Catholicism. For example, the Kingdom of Congo in Africa was influenced by Catholic missionaries. In 1506, the newly succeeded King Afonso I of the Kingdom of Congo was a Catholic. From then on, the Kingdom of Congo also made Catholicism the state religion. But unfortunately, Afonso I would not succeed to the throne until 1506. Now, Alfonso I is still just a prince, and his influence on the Kingdom of Congo is still very limited. Therefore, Portugal cannot take the conversion of the Kingdom of Congo to Catholicism as its own merit, because it has not yet been realized. Before the Kingdom of Congo converted to Catholicism, the contribution of the Kingdom of Portugal in religion was indeed not worthy of carrying shoes for Spain. Therefore, it is not excessive for the Holy See to favor Spain. In short, Portugal can only suffer this time. Of course, Marin released 2 golden kingdoms as bait, and if one of them is swallowed, it is not a loss. However, it is impossible to swallow the golden kingdoms in the interior of Africa in 10 or 20 years. After all, the climate in Africa is too bad. Moreover, the 2 golden kingdoms are not completely powerless. Under the hot climate and the resistance of the enemy, it is not easy to occupy one of the golden empires. The Mali Empire and the Songhai Empire in West Africa are not too strong, but they are not made of mud. Although the local natives are not as good as the European army in terms of equipment and combat effectiveness, they have the advantage of home court and adapt to the hot climate in the local area, so they are not without the ability to resist. For Spain and Portugal, it is very difficult to cross thousands of mountains and rivers in the hot African continent and send thousands or tens of thousands of soldiers and a large amount of supplies to the inland. What's more, if you want to control the gold-producing areas in West Africa, you need to destroy the 2 great empires of Mali Empire and Songhai Empire. If you want to control Great Zimbabwe, you must first destroy the small coastal country established by the Swahili, a mixture of Arabs and blacks, on the coast of Mozambique, and then go deep inland to attack the city of Great Zimbabwe. At the same time, it is also very troublesome to transport troops from the mainland to the coast of Mozambique. After all, there are thousands of mountains and rivers between them. Transporting troops by ship is very limited. As long as Spain and Portugal fall into these 2 big pits, then Marin can secretly expand his power in the Americas. At the same time, open up a route to Daming from Panama. Although it may be a little farther from Panama to Daming, it is not as close as the Cape of Good Hope. However, this route, because it is east-west, can make full use of the monsoon and have smooth sailing all the way, and it takes less time than taking the Cape of Good Hope route. Unlike the Cape of Good Hope route, the wind direction always changes, sometimes with a tailwind, sometimes with a headwind. After sending the letter, Marin began to handle official business. Prime Minister Geoffrey came to Marin's office and asked Marin how to deal with the shipload of paper. After all, the amount of paper on that shipload was very large. Because of the low cost, the craftsmen in the shipyard pursued thickness. Therefore, the paper was made thicker. An ordinary 1 square meter sheet of large white paper weighs 60 grams per sheet, and a knife, 100 sheets, weighs 6 kilograms. This time, Cape Breton Island sent a lot of paper, with 10,000 kilograms of large white paper alone. In addition, there are 1,000 kilograms of whale oil paper. The weight of whale oil paper is even greater, and each sheet of high-quality whale oil paper weighs 7.5 kilograms per square meter. That is to say, the total weight of 10,000 knives of thick white paper and 1,000 knives of whale oil paper reached 67.5 tons. Geoffrey was a little worried and didn't know how to use the paper, so he asked Marin to make a decision. Marin thought about it and decided to buy a lead movable type printing press, invented by the German Johannes Gutenberg around 1450, to print 100 Bibles. Then, print a batch of textbooks for the noble school. As for the artisan school for civilians, Marin did not plan to print textbooks for them for the time being. Because, that's too eye-catching. You know, paper is still very expensive in Europe at this time, and it is a luxury. If you give each child in the civilian school a textbook, it will be too eye-catching. So, Marin decided to print a textbook for each class of civilian children. For the rest, let's use sand trays to write for the time being, which is the most cost-effective. In addition, according to a report mentioned by Geoffrey before, Marin decided to promote paper invoices in the earldom of East Frisia and the earldom of Oldenburg, as well as the duchy of Schleswig. The so-called invoice is a receipt for payment. As for why Marin wants to promote paper invoices, it is because a previous report by Geoffrey stated that some illegal tax collectors took advantage of the existing characteristics of taxation without vouchers to levy taxes and extort some merchants many times. The key to the problem is that unless it is a big merchant with a large amount of goods and a large amount of tax, the tax officer will issue an invoice made of parchment. And those small merchants are originally small businesses with low tax amounts, so they naturally don't need expensive parchment vouchers. Therefore, some black-hearted tax collectors take advantage of the fact that small merchants pay taxes without issuing invoice vouchers to deny that those poor small merchants have paid taxes and levied taxes repeatedly. Unfortunately, those small merchants can't produce evidence of having paid taxes, because they don't have invoices to prove it. Therefore, many small vendors can only be extorted by some illegal tax collectors. And the extra taxes naturally fall into the pockets of those illegal tax collectors. This situation is very unfavorable for the development of domestic commerce. However, Marin had no way before. Those small merchants said that they had paid taxes, but they couldn't produce bills and vouchers. If you file a lawsuit, you will definitely lose. And if you issue vouchers made of parchment or the expensive paper before to small vendors, the cost is too high. Therefore, this problem has been difficult to solve. But now it is different. The paper mills on Cape Breton Island can produce cheap paper in large quantities. At this time, the time is ripe to withdraw paper invoices. Because of the low cost of paper, Marin can issue a large number of invoice books to each tax officer, so that they can issue invoices after each tax collection. Although there is no carbon paper, Marin can ask the tax officer to issue 2 copies, one for filing and one for the merchant as a receipt. In this way, it is very convenient to check the finances, so as not to be exploited by some greedy tax collectors. Moreover, ordinary merchants also avoid being oppressed by tax collectors, which is conducive to the prosperity of the market. At the same time, using invoices made of cheap paper to replace the parchment bills and vouchers used in small quantities can also save a lot of costs. However, invoice paper obviously does not need standard writing paper of 60 grams per square meter, as long as 45 grams per square meter of C-grade paper, A grade paper is 75 grams per square meter, B grade paper is 60 grams per square meter, C grade paper is 45 grams per square meter, is enough. Marin decided to notify the Cape Breton Island paper mill to produce more C-grade paper next time. And then cut and bind it into invoice books and promote it to the tax officials in various towns to strengthen tax management, so that the market order in the country under its rule can be well ordered and the economy can develop healthily.